This fake tale of the great welfare reform of 1996 that was orchestrated between Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton is as much of a myth as is Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, and voter fraud in the 2020 election that supposedly cost Donald Trump the presidency.
I am a big believer in work requirements. Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich in divided government negotiated welfare to work. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say that able-bodied people who are working age, who are not disabled, who are not seniors, should have to go to work if they want someone else to pay for their health care or their benefits in other forms like food stamps. And if we did that, there's real savings on the front end, and then you actually get economic growth on the back end. When you get people off the couch, then you're able to help with some of the labor problems that we have in so many of our small businesses. You're able to get more business confidence, consumer confidence, investment confidence, and we would get back to the productive features of our economy that were roaring during the Trump presidency. And if Joe Biden won't do that, then what he's defending are the couch potatoes over hardworking Americans.
Matt Gaetz and his ridiculous lie. The only problem is the fictional characters that I name are meant to teach children learned behaviors that are revered in productive citizens, i.e., through the use of critical thinking, even beyond when a child learns that Santa Claus isn't real, said child will long remember that they were rewards for being a good person. The same is true with lessons of losing a tooth and gaining monies. The lesson here is that a child would understand that even in loss, there are gains. So if the purpose of the fairy tale and their characters that were previously named is to teach children how to grow and be productive citizens, then what is Matt and others who tell the lie about this myth of a supposedly lazy poor person trying to say to their audience, who aren't kids and have more than adequate access to information that dispels all of these myths and untruths about social welfare? Let us consider this country's initial attempt at social welfare. These were programs that were designed to serve white Union veterans that were disabled, or more importantly, white women who had been widowed by the war. These programs were never met with hostility, and we should also say, while Black men also fought on the side of the Union in the Civil War, their benefits never arrived. The next time this country attempted a social safety net would have been 1893 and 1894 when they created their first unemployment program. Those programs, however, were unsuccessful, not because they were unpopular, but because the country went into a recession. The next attempt by this country to create a social safety net was extremely successful, and it was an attempt to address what was happening in the country due to the Great Depression in 1932. The federal government got busy creating programs, i.e. the Emergency Relief Act, Civilian Conservation Corps, Social Security, and Aid for Families with Dependent Children, AFDC. Might I remind you that it is extremely dangerous for anyone to pretend that Blacks had access to any of these programs in the same way as their white counterparts, or in some cases, at all. The thinking that went behind these programs was mainly that the Social Security and AFDC were to work in tandem, and this country would eventually not need AFDC because as more people went to work, they would be protected either by their salaries or if they were injured at work, by Social Security. If they died at work, the same insurance, Social Security. This is also true for those who retired. They would be paid into Social Security and i.e. be taken care of. However, this is America, and we know that our country has high tolerance for Black suffering, and this was definitely the case as it pertains to these programs. Consider how the work that most Black folk did in those times were exempt from the protection of Social Security, both because of the racism that existed in the hiring processes in the workforce that kept Blacks out of jobs that would have had them paid into Social Security, and also the nature of work that Blacks were able to get, meaning jobs that paid cash, very little cash. Again, it is more than naive for any of us to believe that these factors weren't considered in the time this legislation was presented, as it was status quo of the time. It's also important to note that as it pertains to the aid to family with dependent children, Blacks did not do any better because these programs, while funded by the federal government, they were run by states, and states had plenty plans and tricks to keep Black people from getting access to these funds. Consider New York even, who excluded Black mothers by putting in a residency clause, meaning you had to live in the state for a certain amount of time before you qualified for these benefits, knowing that Black people were migrating from the South. They also put in clauses that said if a man lived in a house, then these funds would be cut off immediately. So let's put this in context. On the one hand, the country was ensuring white families are accessing all of the benefits of higher paying jobs that could actually move their families off of the welfare rolls and into the safety that comes with having adequate pay. And this is happening either through the racism in the hiring process or the federal government ensuring that whites had access to Social Security, all while ensuring Black folk are left to figure it out on their own. After this, and while this is happening, something directly linked to Matt Gaetz' comment occurs: the 1960s. And in the 60s, we see a new phenomenon. The media, mass media, is single-handedly changing the face of poverty. And with this ugly portrayal of America's poor as Black people, we found ourselves with elected officials comfortable to not be sympathetic to poor people. It is documented that mass media literally played more and more images of Black people during this time whenever they talked about poverty, enlisting emotional ideas that required a nation already riddled with racism to go back and go on believing the narrative that whites had pulled themselves up by the bootstrap, while Black folk can't pull themselves up by the bootstrap because they are lazy welfare queens with shifty Negro men trying to pimp them for their welfare checks. So then we get Nixon, who begins to strip away some of the safety net in an attempt to address the so-called lazy Blacks, whom are already looking to get off the system. After Nixon, then we're force-fed Gerald Ford, who continues the same policies of stripping services from poor families, until the 80s when we get Reagan, who comes right out and say welfare queens and is brave enough to put it in a political ad. So then, fast forward to 1996. We get Bill Clinton, who already campaigned in 1991 on the idea that people needed to work and there need to be limits, time limits on people receiving funds from the government. So Clinton decides that he is going to end welfare as he knew it. His words, not mine. As a result of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996, what we call welfare reform, we actually saw a dramatic lowering of numbers of people on welfare. It is childish and young to believe that just because there are a smaller number of people receiving services, that there are less people poor. Because what we know, what studies after study after study has shown us, that Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich and their policies of 1996 actually has forced more Americans into deep poverty. Deep poverty. And to be honest, and if we are being historically accurate, then the welfare system was never defined for the masses. Never. It was designed just for what Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich did. Cut back to a certain people, mainly white women, not even all white mothers. Just those who were deemed deserving, i.e. those not divorced, those not having kids out of wedlock, those that were widowed. So when we hear this fairy tale that Matt Gaetz said on Twitter and told in this video, I am overcome with hostility for the clear lack of history in his statements, but also because of the dog whistling in his tone that hurts even more than not getting visited by Santa Claus or finding $1 under the pillow after losing my favorite tooth. Y'all, we must not allow such ignorance to be spoken without a rebuke of the sayer. And my hate for liars about poverty grows every time I hear politicians lie about Bill Clinton and any other politician who cuts the welfare, as we still have so many people, vulnerable people, suffering with poverty every day in this country. And it's because of policies created by the same politicians. It is our job to rebuke this behavior. I am Mondale Robinson. I rebuke Matt Gaetz for this idea that poor people are lazy and welfare should be cut. Have a good evening, but not before you think about it.